Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining me, the ESPN's senior writer, Marc Ogden, and Martin Hardy, Northern sports correspondent for The Times and Sunday Times. Let's quickly run you through the back pages, starting with the Mirror City sticker and also Toon Eye cut price £30 million bid for Guehi. On the back of the Eye, Pep rally and Friedkins are the right people to turn Everton around, insists Thelwell. In The Guardian, people stop me to tell their own stories of dealing with cancer. It's of great support, says George Burley. And staying power, no relegation break clause in Guardiola's new City contract. In The Telegraph, RFU to suffer record loss. The Villa owner warns that league civil war will damage us all. And Ben Earl says, I didn't sleep for 2 nights after I missed that tackle. In the Mail, City set to launch TV show for kids. We'll talk about that one. And Draper to train in Spain with Alcaraz. And on the back of the Metro, adios Rafa, after Rafa Nadal hangs up his racket and no break for Pep. And that is exactly where we will start on this huge Pep Guardiola story. Good to see you guys. Mr. Ogden, City sticker. No relegation clause then in Pep's new contract, which is still yet to be officially confirmed by Manchester City. Talk us through that one. Is that a surprise? I mean, my sort of take on that when I was reading it was surely if Pep Guardiola wanted to go at any stage, having served up 8 years and 18 trophies, he'd be allowed to go at any point, wouldn't he?
I think that's right. I think, look, there are 2 ways to look at this. First of all, you're right. I think when Pep decides to go, he will go. It won't be up to Man City saying to Pep, look, you've got a year left in your contract, we're going to hold you to that. Pep's earned enough money over his career to be independent in terms of what he does. So, I think that the importance is the message it sends, because if you're going to give Pep Guardiola a new contract, which clearly he's earned, then it'll take him to at least 10 years at the club, which I don't think anybody would have expected, least of all Pep. You can't give him a contract with an escape clause in it for any kind of outcome of the 115 charges against the Premier League. Look, if City lose that and the worst happens and they get a huge points deduction or major fine, which means they are either uncompetitive next season or maybe even demoted, then if you suddenly give Pep a contract which says you can leave on that basis, then first of all, it'll say, what are you worried about? What do you know? What do you think you're going to lose? And secondly, a lot of the top players, your Erling Haaland and people like that, Kevin De Bruyne, were thinking, well, if the manager's got an escape clause, what about me? Why can't I have one? So it's the message it sends. So, yeah, you're right. I think ultimately when Pep wants to go, he'll go. But I think it gives City a bit more security and it sends the right message that, at least on paper, Pep's committed to the long term no matter what happens on the charges issue.
Yeah, Martin, in your paper as well, no break clause in Pep deal, say the Times. City manager's new contract not affected by the outcome of hearing into 115 Premier League charges. There's a siege mentality about all of this from City, isn't there?
Yeah, I think we've kind of followed Pep over that in about the last 12 months when his position has been hard and he's been kind of guaranteed by high-ranking officials at Manchester City that no rules have been broken, and which they insist they have not. And we'll see how that plays out. But it's kind of strengthens his desire to fight amongst his Manchester City players and staff to face the charges. I'm sure he said, come what may, I will be here. And I think I completely agree with what Mark's saying there, but the fact that there isn't a clause, I think, is like a proof of how much he is in this for the long term and how much he is stand beside those, regardless of what happens with the Premier League hearing and into the 115 charges. We're obviously going to touch upon the influence of television in Manchester City's development. But if you watch those, the documentaries that have been done, The Fly on the Walls, which Manchester City do very well, and the season where they won the treble, Pep gives huge credit to Khaldoon Al-Mubarak in terms of the defeat against Chelsea in the Champions League when he was very, very, very low and the players were. And it was Khaldoon who went around Pep Guardiola and all the Manchester City players and picked them up and said, we will do this. Don't worry, lift yourself. We'll go again. So in terms of Manchester City have emerged as one of the biggest football clubs in the world at a time when football has never had as much money in it. But those personal relationships are really fundamental to what Manchester City are still doing. And that relationship between Khaldoon and Pep Guardiola has been hugely significant in this. Tucked away inside Martin Samuel's story in my paper, The Times, is the deal that it could be for another year beyond the end of 2025, 2026 season. We could still have Pep Guardiola here in 2027, which would not be great news if you were the new manager of Manchester United or the new owner of Manchester United. And I think what you are seeing here is a real backing to the club from Pep Guardiola in terms of, I am beside you, come what may here. And it's a real show of unity as they kind of approach this fundamental month or two in terms of what's going to happen for the club's future.
Yeah, and look, you mentioned that story there in the Mail as well, of talking about Pep Guardiola, Mark. And the timing of this is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, look, I'll tell you what, we'll move on and talk about this. That City set for a launch of a TV show for kids, which is a slightly different take on the Pep story, but the Pep cartoon inspiring children all around the world, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can look at this as a gimmick, but you could also look at it in the sense that this is meant to be Ferran Soriano's idea, the City chief executive, and the club multi-club ownership thing was his brainchild 10, 12 years ago. He wanted to start it at Barcelona, didn't get off the ground, then he brought it to Man City, and at the time it was like, well, why do you want to buy clubs all over the world? And you have to say that it's really worked for City. They've got over 10 clubs all over the world now. They can produce players, they can park players in different countries, they can make a success of that, and they have access to so many players. So this idea of a cartoon with, with Pep and people like Erling Haaland in it as characters, it will do really well. It will attract an audience of kids across the world. And I guess City's ambition, as always, is to grow their fan base because, despite their success in recent years, they are still nowhere near as big as the likes of Man United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea. Other clubs you could even mention in the Premier League in terms of fans. They are very much still a club that has most of their fans inside the M60, but they are growing and it's taking time. But obviously, if you can appeal to fans across the world and get them young, then that's what you want because they will grow into City fans as they're older. And if it means creating a cartoon of, Pep and Erling Haaland and all City star players, then why not? City have taken novel approaches in the past and it might work. But again, this also made this be a deflection story that takes you away from the 115 charge and the Premier League vote later this week. So, but either way, it's interesting to see how it progresses.
Let's move on and talk about this Marc Guehi story. Toon Eye cut price, Martin, £30 million bid for Marc Guehi. We know how keen they were to get him in the summer transfer window and talking about £70 million. Where's this story at now?
First of all, I'd be very surprised if Crystal Palace, who are in the middle of a real relegation fight, would be prepared to sell their captain for less than half of what they were offered a matter of months ago. At the same time, Newcastle's priority, from what I'm told, will have changed. They've got Sven Botman, who Eddie Howe thinks will be remembered as one of the great central defenders of the Premier League, not a million miles away from fitness. Could be back at the end of December, start of January. They have PSR to really keep an eye on. They do not want to go down the same road as June of this year, rather, when they were forced to sell Elliot Anderson and Yakuba Minte, two real highly fancied young players to balance the books and to stop a 10-point fine coming in. So I think we'll have to see. And Newcastle have other priorities, and they may have moved on from Marc Guehi. We will see. He's a player they like, but it's going to be a difficult market in January, and Newcastle may have to start selling players before they move as a big power in the transfer market themselves. So this one may be not necessarily at the forefront of their priorities.
Mark, what do you think about this? Is it realistic for Eddie Howe? £30 million, Marc Guehi?
Yeah, I'm with Martin on this. That the valuation's dropped a hell of a lot since the summer, and he's a very good defender, Marc Guehi. So I don't see why Crystal Palace will be in a situation where they want to move him on for half what they could have got less than 6 months ago. Obviously they're in the relegation battle. He's key to their success, their survival. So yeah, I think he will move on eventually. I think other clubs are looking at Marc Guehi as well, but I think for that price, I think it's an unrealistic figure that he would move for that figure.
Martin, I want to talk to you about the Tottenham story emerging today and Tottenham contesting Bentancur's severe 7-game ban. What's your reading into that?
It looks like that they are fighting over one game to get the ban reduced to 6. And it's a situation where you feel they may have been better just to have accepted the punishment and let the story, which appeared to have run its course, kind of die its death. But this has brought it back to life, and we are reminded that the ugly phrase from Bentancur, which was what he queried afterwards, slightly spuriously, about he was making it as a joke when he said it. You know, it could be Sonny's cousin as well because they all look the same, and it was such an awful phrase that was said on television in Uruguay. And the panel was fairly conclusive and fairly damning on the abusive and/or insulting words that were used here. This seems like an unlikely point that they're going to get the reduction down to 6 games. I think Tottenham may have been better advised on this one to have moved on.
Mark, how did Tottenham come out of this looking?
Well, not great, because like Martin says, that the minimum sentence for this, or the minimum punishment for this offence is 6 games, between 6 and 12 games. So on that basis, you would think that they've got it quite lightly, because they were never going to get 6, because that would have been the absolute minimum. And is it really worth keeping this in the public domain, keeping the uncertainty hanging over the club for weeks now, while they try and get 1 game knocked off it? I just think that sometimes you just got to take it. They accepted that Bentancur was in the wrong. So take the punishment and move on and just focus on something else and get the picture away from this messy saga, because it's not good for Tottenham, it's not good for Bentancur, and it's probably not good for Son Heung-min either, because it keeps him in the spotlight for the wrong reasons as well. None of it his fault.
Right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will look more at some of the back pages, including this in The Sun. Pep stays. Now Erling wins the Golden Loot. You're watching Back Pages tonight, and welcome back to ESPN senior writer Marc Ogden and Martin Hardy, Northern sports correspondent from The Times and The Sunday Times. Let's get stuck into The Sun and the story that says Golden Loot, Haaland's £100 million deal. Manchester City will step up their efforts to convince Erling Haaland to follow Pep Guardiola in signing a new contract. Marc Ogden, what do we make of that? Out of contract in 2027, could Pep inspire Erling?
Well, there's always been a bit of a mystery about Erling Haaland, about the status of his contract. And does he have an escape clause? And it's never been confirmed or denied by people around him. So he had an escape clause at Salzburg. He had an escape clause at Borussia Dortmund, which let him leave for a certain fee. Now, clearly, City would need to buy that out to keep him at the club, because if they were to persuade Erling Haaland to sign a new contract, that would be much more significant than Pep Guardiola doing it. Because as we discussed earlier on, Pep Guardiola could walk tomorrow, and I don't think City could do anything about it, because he's brought so much success and he's wealthy enough to do that. With Erling Haaland, obviously they could command a fee, and I think City's fear is that they lose control of Haaland's future. And if Haaland was to sign a new contract, maybe without an escape clause, then that would tie him to the club for the peak of his career. So it would be a massive deal for City, but equally, Haaland would have to be convinced that he would play in that time at City, in the Premier League at the top end, in the Champions League. And we don't know what's going to happen to Man City. We keep getting back to the situation where we don't know what the situation will be in 6 months' time at the end of this process with the Premier League. So persuading a player as big as Erling Haaland to sign a new contract would be massive for City, and a much, much bigger message to everybody else than Pep Guardiola signing a new contract.
Yeah, Martin, 24 years old, he's earning a reported £375,000 a week. That's just the minimum, of course, without all the add-ons and the bonuses. And if Pep Guardiola is going to rebuild this Manchester City team, he will want him at the top of that rebuild, won't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the big parts of the fact that Pep Guardiola is going to stay, that these players will be far more likely to continue their career at Manchester City now that he's there. It's an interesting point Mark makes there, that if the worst was to come after the 115 charges and Manchester City were to be relegated, it's all good and well Pep Guardiola saying I'm here for the next 2 seasons, but does Erling Haaland want Championship football for a year with no Champions League, and then the following season no Champions League either? That would be a big ask, and perhaps these players will just wait to see what actually happens before they commit. At the same time, what you were seeing is this is a Manchester City team that probably does need freshening up. And at 24, Haaland's game has developed under Pep Guardiola from primarily being this battering ram, brilliant goal scorer when he arrived, to his all-round game seems to be getting better. And again, as Mark said, we could be talking about 3 or 4 years' time, the peak of his career. And it's, will he have spent it all at Manchester City, or will there be a move to somewhere like Madrid, or will Barcelona have the money then to kind of tempt him there? But certainly in terms of a salary pushing towards £500,000 per week seems to be kind of realistic for somebody of Haaland's goal scoring prowess and just how fundamental he is to what Manchester City do and how they win trophies. They will fight like anything to keep him in. What's he got left? 2.5 years. So yeah, negotiations will I would imagine be ramped up, and we'll see how that ties in with the charges and whether or not Manchester City are found guilty.
Mark, let's move on and talk about the story in the Eye. Friedkins are the right people to turn Everton around, insists Thelwell. This is Kevin Thelwell, Everton's director of football, talking about the prospective new owners, the Friedkins group. They need someone to turn them around, don't they?
They do, but there's a suggestion that the deal could be done by the January transfer window. And it might not mean there's a lot of money invested in the squad in January, but it will just end all the uncertainty ahead of a massive year with Everton moving into the new stadium from their part, hopefully in the Premier League. But we're not sure of that yet. I mean, I think Everton have had a really bad 2-3 years, and I think that the 777 partners deal was a real worry for the club because they had a checkered reputation of the clubs that they'd owned in Europe, and it wasn't looking great for Everton. But I think the Friedkin group at least have got some success with Roma. They've won European success with Roma, I think, under Jose Mourinho. So they have got an idea how to run a football club. So from Everton's perspective, they might not be the wealthiest owners in terms of being able to transform the club like Sheikh Mansour's done at Man City, but they seem to know what they're doing. And I think that is massive for Everton going forward because, like I say, it's a huge year, leaving Goodison Park, moving to a new stadium, and hopefully from their point of view in the Premier League with new owners. Yeah, and moving into a new stadium, Martin, as well. Look at potentially exciting times around the corner for those Everton fans, but there have been so many false dawns, haven't there, at Goodison Park?
No, absolutely. You can still feel that desire to kind of rekindle the mid-'80s when they had one of the great English teams amongst the supporters, and they're still holding on to that memory, and understandably so. They have this great battle with Liverpool in their city, and they've got a new ground, and they want direction. The club's felt like it's been treading water and putting out fires for probably longer than Mark says there, probably 3 or 4 seasons. It just seems to be in this cycle of poor signings and a lack of goals, question marks over the style of football, which still remain, and in terms of whereabouts can Everton compete in the modern era, and the need to hit the ground running in the new stadium. They need to be a Premier League team that could do without just finishing 4th or 5th bottom this season and creating some momentum to go there. This is going to be a football ground that holds 55,000, and if Everton have a team, and we'll see if Sean Dyche is the man to take them forward. Quite often, new owners within a short space of time look for a new manager, but Sean Dyche has done a decent job. There might be a feeling that there is more talent there inside the squad than what's been shown so far. But it could be exciting times for Everton, but there's a lot of question marks to come first.
Let's move on and talk about a Rugby Union story, which is on the front of the Daily Telegraph sports section. We know England, of course, Mark, struggling on the pitch. And this story saying the RFU set to suffer record loss. The Rugby Football Union is set to make a record loss, which could approach £40 million when its end-of-year accounts are published in the next month. Telegraph Sport can reveal. Expand on that one for us.
Yeah, it's an incredible story because the English RFU are the biggest, most powerful, most profitable, well, used to be, union in world rugby. They earn more than the All Blacks and the Springboks and the French. They are the powerhouse, but obviously they lost a lot of money in recent times, and I think that explains why the naming rights to Twickenham were sold to Allianz recently, £100 million over 10 years. So that helps keep the money coming in, but the RFU shouldn't be losing such huge amounts of money, considering that the the resources they have and the size of the game in England, how big Rugby Union is in England in terms of the depth of the talent pool and the league. So, yeah, that needs sorting out because England are a very, very major Rugby Union powerhouse.
Yeah, and we know all about the struggles, Martin, don't we, of club sides in England's Rugby Union's teams. But hence the renaming of Twickenham. Well, it's a pivotal moment for English rugby.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that within the story, the predicted loss was 59 million. The 100 million Mark alludes to for the Allianz Arena naming rights doesn't seem to be included in there. And Twickenham is, despite recent results, being sold out long in advance for major internationals. But inside of the story, towards its end, is I'm not sure if it's a revelation. It's going to cost £663 million to refurbish Twickenham, which will be, I'd imagine, a multi-year job. And therefore, you have to think, where's that funding going to come from? And therefore, in the modern era of sport, are we talking significant increases in corporate and the match day corporate support and what they can invest? Because a 40 million loss put against 663 million is just a drop in the ocean. So you can only assume that the revenue streams that rugby has, well, you have to assume that the rugby streams the RFU have going forward couldn't handle that kind of loss and then create the kind of funding to redevelop Twickenham, I guess, so it becomes the leading rugby stadium in the world.
Let's finish, guys, with a story in the Times, a cricket story. Jofra Archer and Archer's U-turn over IPL hits England plans. Jofra Archer, Mark, is now expected to play in the Indian Premier League next year, despite the ECB's attempts to prevent him taking part in the weekend's player auction, renewing concerns over his workload and how prepared he will be for the next Ashes series.
Yeah, it's just a situation where money talks, isn't it, Will? Because there was a suggestion last week that he would be out of this auction, but because it's been explained that if he misses this one, he'll miss next year's as well. That's 2 years of massive money that you're not going to earn. And, as well as you might want to play in the Ashes next year, missing out on 2 years IPL money for a cricket who, injuries caught up with him a few times, it's a lot to lose. So it looks like he's going to be in the auction after all.
Martin, your take on that one quickly?
The IPL should be finished by May. As long as he hasn't had any recurrence of his elbow injury, it's a couple of months after that the Ashes start. So, he should be able to do both. He should be able to earn his money and be a pivotal figure in the Ashes series.
Yeah, and look, we all know how pivotal, Martin, he could be, Jofra Archer, but he's certainly been in the headlines for various reasons, hasn't he, over the last few years?
Yeah, but him and Mark Wood are genuine fast bowlers. These are players that can make a difference and help England win the Ashes. So I'm sure they'll give him time and every opportunity to be in the squad.
Thank you very much to you guys, to Marc Ogden and to Martin Hardy. And if you missed any of the show, there's a chance to see Back Pages tonight at hour, and the show's also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again on Thursday night when our guests will be Jonathan Liu from The Guardian and The Independent's Miguel Delaney. Thanks for watching.